Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Edge podcast, where it's all about providing practical tips to entrepreneurs and business owners out there so they can win in the marketplace, make their ideas come to life, but also grow their business. On this episode, you're joining an awesome conversation with myself and also Jesse Armstrong, who is the CEO of Vaka. For those who don't know, Vaka is an education company on a mission to ignite the next wave of STEAM entrepreneurs. They teach kids, teenagers, and adults how to make money from 3D printing. And they do that through professional training programs and workshops delivered all across Aotearoa. Well, Jesse, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to kick things off here, maybe share something about yourself, something interesting that people don't know about.
Well, being Māori, I'll start off with something a bit more formal. So, tēnā koutou katoa, to all those listening, ko Jesse Armstrong tōku ingoa, hiuri tēnei no Ngāti Hine e me Waikato, ko Aotearoa to Vaka. So yeah, my name is Jesse Armstrong, co-founder and CEO of Vaka. Started the company a couple of years ago, and something that you should know about myself is that I am very much a hands-on learner. I don't like sitting down and just listening to stuff. Often I will, in the mahi that we do, I'll kind of delegate all of the spreadsheet stuff and anything that's kind of more boring to my co-founder who loves that kind of thing. And I'll focus more on all the hands-on, practical, kind of creative stuff. So yeah, I've done, in terms of creative background, I've done anything from audio engineering to graphic design, dabbled in web design a little bit and still kind of doing a bit more of that now. And of course, 3D printing, 3D design. So I just kind of get curious about creative things and just like to dabble, and then whatever I kind of lock onto is what I'll obsess over, and that's effectively what led to the business we run today.
I think that's a classic example of an entrepreneur. Someone who's tried a lot of things, dabbled in different places, but you've taken the learning with you across, but also just hands-on, someone who's practical. And I think that's a good characteristic of an entrepreneur.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so hey, thank you again for joining us on a podcast. Cool. We're keen to kind of pick your brains here as an entrepreneur, business owner, to help provide some value to some of our audience.
Cool.
So let's kick off with our first question. Tell us a little bit about Vaka, your mission, because your mission is to ignite the next wave of STEAM entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about that, and how did this company or this idea come about?
Sure. So I should probably start off by highlighting what STEAM stands for, because some people have heard of it, some people kind of haven't. So STEAM is basically short for science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths. And it came about, it used to be referred to as STEM, and then they kind of added the A, which is the arts part, a bit later on. But it was an education initiative that started a number of years ago because there were, as you've probably seen, there are major issues in certain industries where we don't have enough skill and talent here in Aotearoa in particular. So, the technologies that tend to be science, technology, engineering, arts, maths, and all that kind of stuff, they have struggled to get kids interested in it from an earlier age. And so we've seen a major wave of students who grew up, they had parents who were really keen for them to go to university, and they would kind of know the big three. Doctor, lawyer, accountant was kind of like, these are really high-paying jobs. So you saw this massive wave of students going for those types of careers. Doesn't mean they didn't go for any other, none of the other careers got students focused on those either, but you had a majority of them focusing towards those types of careers. And while, that was all well and good, we have all these other amazing industries that we need skill and talent in particular with Māori Pasifika. So, when you think about our people, we are very much a hands-on practical people. In terms of how we learn, a lot of our kids, they struggle at school because they're similar to me. If they're just told information, it sometimes can just go in one ear and out the other. But if you get their hands on things and they actually get to use technology or whatever, all of a sudden they can make stuff with it and start saying, okay, well, what can I do with this now? And so our focus was, let's introduce kids to STEAM. And of course, that includes educators and everyone else who supports them. But then we'll teach them how to actually make money from it, because we found a couple of things. One, kids get really, really interested, and the curiosity peaks when they hear, wait, I can make money from this, especially when you show them how easy it is. And then with educators, a lot of them see this kind of STEM education stuff, the STEAM education stuff, and they really want to use it in the classroom, but they have no idea how. And so you might be lucky as a school to have one or two teachers that's kind of like STEAM, proactive in STEAM. but majority of schools don't. And it's kind of this like wasted opportunity when you have educators that are really keen to do something, but they just don't know what to do or how to do that. So that's kind of where the idea for the company came about. We were actually doing something very different prior to COVID. So the birth of our company now came from kind of two main kind of events that took place. One was losing our first business, which once again was because of COVID. We were developing interactive storytelling tech, and most of our customers were tourism based. So when COVID hit, at first we were thinking, okay, it's going to be a short-term thing like most people. Then when we realized it was going to be long-term and the tourism industry was affected as much as it was, we had to pull the plug and just kind of end that business. So we did have a need to start a new business, but the other part of the story as to how the idea came about was just me being a tutu. So I went and bought a 3D printer during the lockdown because here's me sitting in my apartment like getting itchy hands, like I got to do something, and bought a 3D printer and just started using YouTube to learn how to use it. And made all these amazing things. And that's where I started realizing this technology is amazing. Like, why aren't we using this all over the place? Why don't you see 3D printers in every school? Why aren't kids learning how to make things with these machines? And that's kind of what sparked the idea to kind of investigate that problem. And lo and behold, 2 years later, or 2.5 years later, led to what we're doing now. So, yeah.
There's a lot of good gems in there that I love, and I remember my upbringing, my school experience. Technology, science, math. That was just like, oh, that's for the smart kids. I'll stay away from that. I'll do arts and graphics because it's more hands-on. That's more me. And I totally get where you're coming from. Yeah. And I think STEM's a nice way to kind of not really hide the technology, science, and all of that, but it's a nice word. But also, I love what you've done. You found a sweet spot in terms of, STEM and also entrepreneurship. Yeah. You don't really see much of that.
Yeah. That came about from just doing a bit of research in the industry. So STEM, in terms of STEM initiatives, there are actually quite a lot of companies here in New Zealand really pushing STEM in schools. These are private companies that go in and work with schools. And then from a Ministry of Education standpoint, it's a bit slow, but the digital curriculum that they've kind of started pushing, it's one of the key steps that need to happen for this to become the norm. So when we investigated the industry, we saw there's lots of STEAM stuff out there. That's not the problem. The problem is we can't see pretty much any of it that ties the gap between entrepreneurship and STEAM. And I've always loved this idea of imagine a high school kid being able to make enough money from technology while at school to go and start a business and either A, pay for all of their uni studies themselves, or B, not even go to uni because their business is doing so well, they just run the business after school. So yes, that's kind of where this idea of entrepreneurship and STEAM came from. And we realized that the key to getting these kids invested enough to give it a go is to actually just break it down to a point where it seems so simple, it's almost too good to be true. And that's where we see a lot of our success is when like these kids look at the stuff that they can make and they're like, I don't know if I can make that because, as you said, I'm not very brainy when it comes to tech or anything. But then we found, using a number of techniques we've developed, we found a way to help them overcome those barriers and prove to themselves, holy heck, I can make this kind of stuff. Well, what if I made this and this and this and this and this? And then they're off to the races. So
that's so cool. Yeah. Before we get further into it, because there are some things that you said earlier that I just wanted to highlight in terms of entrepreneurship. So, in terms of your journey and how you ended up with Vaka, it wasn't just a one-off thing or your first idea. Yeah. You tried different business ideas and, some things worked out and, you took some of the key learnings, but now here you are. In terms of entrepreneurship, I think that's what people should take into consideration is it's not looking for the one perfect idea. The main thing is just get started, try a few things and progress towards the business that you're aiming for might not be the first idea. Yeah. It might be 3 or 4 down the line, but you'll never know unless you act and try things. That's right. Yep. Right?
I've always felt that science and entrepreneurship are more closely related than people think. If you look at entrepreneurship, it's a business thing. So a lot of people don't connect the gaps between science and entrepreneurship. But if you think of the methodologies that scientists use when they're trying to prove a theory, it's very similar in entrepreneurship. The theory is, I have this idea and I think it could make money because it would solve a need for these people, right? And then you have to experiment on that. You literally, as you said, you have to just give it a go and then see what happens. And if it doesn't quite work, then just like scientists do, they will evaluate go back to the drawing board and say, okay, well, that didn't quite work. How could we tweak it to make it better for the next experiment? And entrepreneurs, we do the same thing. Okay, that idea didn't quite sell. Was it because the idea wasn't good, or because the way I was communicating the idea wasn't that good? Okay, well, I'll go and refine and tweak that. So yeah, they're very similar, those two methodologies, yeah.
I love that. And I think it's quite genius, and it's awesome that Vaka has been able to figure that out, entrepreneurship and STEAM, and making it engaging, especially for rangatahi.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't just work with youth, you work with adults as well, I like. So obviously you mentioned earlier around, there's a lot of STEAM programs and training, out there. That's not the problem.
Yeah.
But what makes Vaka a little bit different from all the other STEAM trainings out there?
I think for us, one thing is we specifically, exclusively focus on 3D printing. So a lot of the other STEAM providers, which what they're doing, by the way, is needed, definitely needed. They're more focused on the exposure side of it. So rather than pinpointing one particular area of STEAM, they'll do a number of initiatives to expose kids to things like robotics and electronics and biochemical engineering and all of these different areas. So then when the kids kind of like dabble and say, oh, I actually really like that, they'll decide to pursue it a bit further. We aren't necessarily in that same kind of pool. Our focus is let's get them exposed to 3D printing, and then the ones who start seeing the ideas, and typically we know who these are because you'll hear them say things like, well, do you think I could make this and sell it to these people? And all of a sudden we're like, okay, this kid's got it, right? That's who we're really focused on finding, is the ones who get exposed to this and think, you know what? I actually think I could do something with this now while I'm still at school, not when I graduate and go to uni and get a degree and work for a business for X number of years. So I think that what makes us really different is we are focused on practical results right off the bat. So for example, it's not just about teaching them how to use the tech. What we'll actually do is we'll get them to use the technology and train them, but then as soon as they start making their first ideas, we start connecting them with commercial opportunities. So then they actually have some way of making money right off the bat, and not as a theoretical thing they can do maybe 2 or 3 years later on. So yeah, I would probably say that's what makes us a bit more different. Yeah.
Nice. So it's more than just exposure or awareness around some of the tech out there.
Yeah.
It's experience, experiment, and then also when they do create something, you help them take it commercial.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is a great idea.
Yeah, that's
which is awesome. So it's like, in terms of a business, you're not just a worker, you're not just someone who creates and manufactures things, but you're also, from an employer's perspective, about business, marketplace, clients. So it's a step up from there. And it's cool because then they get to understand the whole process.
That's right. Yeah.
From beginning to end when it comes to a business.
Yeah, that's
there's the making and the selling of it as well, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So I love that. So let's take us a little bit more into the workshop, into the environment where they are learning.
Sure.
Give us some insights around that. How do you do that? How do you keep them engaged, etc.?
So I would say that the first thing in terms of rangatahi themselves, because what we do with educators is somewhat very different to what we're doing with rangatahi. So speaking on the rangatahi side, we'll run a series of workshops, and these workshops are designed to produce real results by the end of the workshop, meaning we expose them to 3D printing. We guide them through a 3D design process, and then typically these workshops will happen over a couple of days. So we have time overnight to print their designs, and then by the second day they come back and they actually have something that they've made and created in their hands. One of the most popular workshops we run is designing your own 3D printed taonga. So the one that I'm wearing now is my own design. That's fully 3D printed. I can take it off and kind of show you a bit too.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I've taken headphones off.
Wow.
So, here we go.
Check this out.
Yeah.
Check that out. Straight 3D printing here.
Yep. So this is 3D printed plastic. It's commonly referred to as PLA, which is probably the most common material that we use. And then I used resin with a syringe needle to inject the resin into the middle, and then used some sandpaper and water to kind of sand it and polish it down to get this look. All in all, the time it took for me to make the design itself, the actual 3D design part, literally was like 10 minutes. And this is what we do in the workshop. We'll teach them how to use the software, but then we actually show them clever techniques and tricks that allow them to make high quality designs in a very short period of time.
Wow.
So for example, with our taonga workshop, we've created web pages that have models that we've already made and patterns that we've already curated and assembled from Te Ao Māori. We've been very careful as well to make sure that from a being tika to the design side of Te Ao Māori, we've made sure that we're choosing universal designs and not any particular iwi specific ones. But the more important thing that we teach in this workshop is before you even actually touch the software, we're going to sit down and think about the intention behind the design. What's a narrative that the youth can create for themselves? So then when they make this design, they're not just chucking Māori stuff together and saying, man, that looks cool. It's something that tells a story that relates to something that's meaningful to them. So quick example with this one here, I decided the narrative behind my taonga was going to be something that would allow me to become an innovator. When I put it on, I step into the realm of innovation from a Te Ao Māori standpoint. So I chose the tuki, which is a chisel, kind of chisel head, part of the tuki hand tool that our tupuna, our ancestors used. And to me, this tool was used for pretty much every facet of life, from construction to preparing kai. They use this tool for everything. And as an entrepreneur, as you know, when you have certain things available to you, you want to maximize the potential of those tools and materials as much as possible. So when I look at the tuki, that to me is the perfect symbol of what it means to be a Māori innovator. I chose these other two patterns. The kind of pointy pattern here is called a pakati, so it's like dog's teeth. And typically it's associated with warriors as a symbol of strength and courage. And so, as you know, every day when you get up and you decide I'm going to keep running my business as an entrepreneur, even if you've been doing it for a long time and you've got good revenue streams and you've got a good, office set up and everything, you still have to sometimes remind yourself that you have to be courageous, because you see with COVID, some businesses, everything just went like that.
Yeah.
And I still have days now where I wake up and part of me is like, man, is this business going to work? Even though I've been doing this for a long time. And so this reminds me to be courageous and to try and find solutions rather than focus on things that I can't control. The last part is the ahu ahu mataroa, which is this kind of ladder pattern. And the meaning behind this, one side of the meaning is kind of overcoming challenges. And I think of it as literally climbing a ladder every day. So when I get up as an entrepreneur innovator, I have to try to make as much progress as I can. And some days I can climb like 5-6 rungs at a time. Other days, I'm so burned out that maybe if I'm lucky, I get one rung, or sometimes I feel like I get pushed back a few, and then I have to climb my way back up. So for me, this taonga is so special because when I put it on in the mornings, I now step away from my role as an individual, as a family member, as a friend, and step into the realm of innovation. And I've actually set a bit of a tikanga rule around this. I wear this only when I do my mahi. So at the end of the day, when I physically take this off, I have finished mahi for the day. And I can tell you now, from coming from many days where I've burned myself out because I've overworked myself, it's kind of become this like mental trigger that's helped me to step away from work and focus on all those other aspects of life that are just as important. So this is the kind of thing we teach youth to make, yeah.
That is awesome. And this is just one example of many. Check that out.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. This is so cool. Thank you for sharing that. What I love about this, Jesse, is it's more than just creating something. And I love how, whether it's adults or youth, before you just jump on the computer or before you just get into the whole creating and building things, you design. What's the why? What are we trying to achieve here? And every entrepreneur should be like that too. There needs to be a moment where you pause and be like, before I just jump ahead and do things, what's my intention?
Yeah.
What's the why? What am I trying to achieve? And that's just a good principle as an entrepreneur to have.
Yeah.
And it's not just right at the beginning. It's I like this because it's a reminder. As an entrepreneur, there's got to be checkpoints. And I love how you've designed and built something that it's more than just a symbol and a meaning, but as an entrepreneur, you use it to help reflect.
That's right.
That is so cool.
Thank you.
And I think what you mentioned there, and it's something I admit as well, entrepreneur and business owner, you wake up some days and you're like, man, yesterday was hard, or last week was hard, or you always got challenges as an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur, you have to be a problem solver. Oh yeah, it's just entrepreneurs are problem solvers, right? And so there are moments we're human. And we do go through emotions and stuff, but we have to stay strong. Our team needs us. Our clients need us. The business needs us. So maybe, this is going a little bit from our questions here. I'd like to dive deep into the mindset of an entrepreneur. Sure. How do we help entrepreneurs out there who might be going through roller coasters in terms of mindset, because it really does start with mindset and it can hold you back from moving the business forward.
Yeah.
So maybe give us some tips and insights around that, or key learnings.
Yeah. So I am a very stubborn person, especially when it comes to work, right? So I will try to be the noble guy who's like, I'm going to work 12 hours a day because that's what real entrepreneurs do. I used to believe that, tooth and nail, that was who I was as an entrepreneur. And you hear a lot of these big time entrepreneurs like perpetuating this mentality that if you want to be successful, you should be putting in 80 to 100-hour weeks. What I have learned now is that it is extremely toxic to think like that as an entrepreneur. And for those who are feeling, maybe you've been through your current business, you've been through seasons where it's been mega successful, and maybe now you're going through a period where it's not so successful and you're feeling really almost depressed about it, because it's sometimes we associate our value as a person with the way that our business is going. What I've learned is that often it stems from burnout. If you are feeling that way about your business and it's hard to feel optimistic about it and proactive, you are probably burned out mentally, physically, emotionally, or all three. So what I've now learned, being a stubborn person, it took me a long time to learn this. What I've now learned is that when I feel that way about my business, and I can typically tell when I'm doing this because I'll wake up in the morning and be like, oh man, I've got to go into the office today. If I'm feeling that way about my business, I need to take a couple of days off and literally do nothing to do with my business. It might sound counterintuitive, especially if your business is going through some financial struggles and you've got a lot of decisions that need to be made. And I do understand for some people, they can't afford to take that much time off, but just take some time off. Even if it's half a day, take some time off and do something completely different. Do something that you're interested in, like a personal project or spend time with family and friends, because what you'll find is that when you give your brain a rest from worrying about all that stuff, and you come back and think about those problems, you'll find that you'll have a completely different outlook on it. You'll start thinking about it more proactively rather than, oh man, now I've got to go back to solving these problems.
Yeah.
Because the brain can only do so much. The body can only handle so much. And as entrepreneurs, we have to realize we are not superhuman. We are normal people. In fact, some of us I've met as entrepreneurs who have seemed to have the most successful businesses tend to be some of the most depressed people I've ever met, because they are constantly obsessing and thinking about their business, and they don't really have anything else happening in their life outside of that. So you have to step away for a bit, come back later. That's probably the biggest tip that I can give.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I mean, for me, it's like going to the gym. You're working out. Yeah. You're strong. Yeah. Over time, but you got to rest. You can't just be, working out 24 hours of the day, or there's got to be a time where you got to rest and recover. Yeah. Right. And then you come back at it again. Yep.
And you're stronger next time, right?
And you're much more stronger.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't mean that you're weak or you're inadequate or you're neglecting anything at all. Right. It just means you got to look after yourself before you can help others, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the principle here. Yeah. And I love what you said there around spending time doing things that you're passionate about, or things that help give you energy as well. Because let's be honest, business can suck a lot out of us. Our time, our mind, because we got constantly problem solving and that kind of thing as well. Yep. And so we get it. But something that I like to do, especially with education and that, is having dates with my wife during the day. Not because we've got kids, so we juggle a lot.
Yeah.
We juggle a lot of responsibilities. But we go during the day when the kids are down. We still do the date nights, but you try and fit those kind of stuff in. So it might not be like, let's work hard for 3 weeks, then I have a break. But sometimes it's in between doing the little things, That's right. As well.
And
so
even though it's a small amount of time, the benefit can be enormous, right? Like you might only maybe have enough to sneak away for half an hour with your wife, but maybe you just have such a good time during that half an hour that it makes the rest of your day exciting to tackle all those problems,
Yeah.
Because you've had such a good time in that short period of time. So I totally agree with that kind of mentality,
And I love that, because I love what you share here with your taonga here. You made this, but it's also symbolic of when you take it off mentally as well. It's not just a physical thing, but mentally you're present with your family. Yeah. I've mentally left work and I'm present with my whānau or whatever it is,
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's the same thing as well, when you're taking that break, take a mental break as well.
Yeah.
So I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think it was just important to kind of go into that a little bit, the mindset of entrepreneur.
Yeah, sure.
So let's get back into Vaka in terms of, with Vaka, obviously you've got your team, but you're working with a lot of clients. You work with a lot of different organizations, non-profit, government, all sorts.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that. How do you collaborate with these and how do you pick the right people to work with?
Yeah, the key here is to be real staunch. And I say this, it might seem counterintuitive because one might think, well, you don't want to be selfish in any kind of working relationship, which is true. Always think win-win for sure, but know what your boundaries are and really put your foot down and say, we don't cross this line. So for example, we've had some funding organizations we met with. When they see the kind of mahi that we do, they're in love with it. They're like, oh man, we love what you guys do. We have funding for this kind of stuff. We'd be more than happy to give it to you. Oh, sorry, we thought you were a not-for-profit. This funding can only go for not-for-profit, so, sorry. But if you wanted to, maybe set up a not-for-profit and do it that way, we could do that. And we've just been staunch and said, no, we're not going to do that for a couple of reasons. One, it's not because we're greedy and we just want the money for ourselves. In fact, all of our profits, we pretty much reinvest straight back into the company because we're growing right now as well. And we want to hire rangatahi and all that kind of stuff, right? But for us, it's more of a principle-based thing. How can we go in front of rangatahi and teach them to start businesses and encourage them to generate profit if we become a not-for-profit and don't do that ourselves? I wouldn't feel right doing that. It wouldn't feel tika for me to do that. So we've been real staunch about this, which means it does limit who we can kind of partner with or how we can partner with certain organizations. But it's allowed us to be very clear and start finding the right partners who actually want to work with us, that are willing to kind of, especially if they've got these policies in place that are like, we only fund charitable trusts and not-for-profits. Often they'll, if we find the right one, they'll be willing to make exceptions, provided that, the activities we're being funded for aren't profit generating. And that's works more than happy for us. So that's one of those key things. Another one is really understand, most of these organizations we partner with, they care about the rangatahi. So what's most important for us is not so much figuring out all the details of how this relationship is going to work. It's more important that we figure out, what do you want to see for your rangatahi? By the end of this relationship, or as we're going about this relationship together as organizations, what do you want the rangatahi to get from it, so we can make sure what we do enables that to happen. And that's created repeat business for us from many different organizations that we honestly thought we were only going to do kind of a single one-off thing with, because they realized we are all about the rangatahi. It's got very little to do with our own mahi and what we do. We care more about the kids than we do about our own mahi. So
yeah, you're not chasing the money, you're chasing the impact, the purpose. And if you're just focused on the why and doing it with the right intention, you just tend to attract those people anyway, because of your values and what you believe in. Right? I believe in what you believe in, so I want to work with you.
Absolutely.
And so, hey, it's important, especially entrepreneur, pick your battles. Don't just chase the money and say yes to everybody. And I've learned that the hard way myself. So something you learn that over time, but I think, how do you be clear on that? So obviously your why and your values, but also the business as well. So looking ahead of time in terms of 3 to 5 years, and where do we want the business to be? And that will help you understand also what kind of markets and clients you should be kind of working with.
That's exactly it. You have to be clear about who you are and what you do and what you don't do. When we started in business with our previous business, we were going for different funds from government, and we were trying to partner with different government ministries. And some of them were amazing to work with. They basically said, hey, we love what you guys do. We've got some funding. Here it is. You guys do what you do with it. Others want you to fit their agenda, and they'll start giving you all of these key things that you now have to do for them that you don't necessarily have to do for others. And what ends up happening is you waste a lot of extra time having to cater to all these very specific needs. So part of being staunch about what we do is, especially if it's a government ministry we're looking to get funding from, we basically say, look, once we know how much they can offer, we will do our thing with this. You tell us what type of reporting metrics you want. We'll provide the reporting, no worries. But you need to just let us do the mahi the way that we know it needs to be done, and not try to get involved in every little step of the decision-making process, because then the rangatahi suffer at the end of the day. And of course, it means we waste more time and energy having to go backwards and forwards on that. Be very careful for those who are starting to work with large organizations. Nothing wrong with them, but just be very careful about what they are asking you to do. and get that out of the way in your first few meetings with them. Make it very clear what they are asking you to do, so then you don't enter into a long-term relationship that burns bridges with them and burns you out because you've had to do all this extra work that you could have easily avoided if you're just being clear with them from the beginning. So we've learned that the hard way several times now. Yeah. That's all I can say as a warning to those in that space. Yeah.
I loved it. And I guess as you scale and you grow, you kind of quickly realize that, yes, we've got these resources, but we can't just say yes to everybody. I can't invest my team here and invest all of this here. Like we've got to be quite clear. And I like that because it's too easy, especially when you're just starting off business, to say yes to everything because you just need the money.
Yeah, that's right.
You need the money.
That's right.
Right. But hey, at the beginning that might be the case, but still be careful. And I like what you said in terms of before you sign a contract, understand the kind of work that's required or what they're asking from you and what you need from them. Don't just say yes, close the deal, and then from there be like, cool, team, I've just signed the contract. We've got to deliver. We've got to do this. We've got to do that. That's really reactive, and that hurts your team.
Can I share? I'll share an example of this. Yeah. This was in our very early stages with our previous business. We I won't mention the specific government ministry, but it was one of the ministries that approached us. They had like 90K to give us. And at the time, being a young startup, we were like, 90K, this is mean. Like, wow, this is like the biggest contract we would have taken on. We went into that so naive because what we didn't realize is that they were only going to pay us. They weren't even going to pay like a percentage of it up front for us to get started. They were only going to pay us when all of the work was done. And the nature of our work is not something we can just do like over a week. It's like months and months of work. But here's us thinking, okay, well, we don't want to stuff this up because like we're just a small company and they're a really big government ministry. Okay, we're just going to work our butts off and get it done as fast as possible. And then we can get those invoices paid. Long story short, it was supposed to be like a 4 or 5 month contract. This turned into almost a year and a half of going backwards and forwards because every little change that we were trying to make was going through like 3 levels of management. And manager number 1 and 2 would be like, yep, no, that's fine with us. Manager 3 would be like, nah, this needs to change, go back. And that would have to go back through the managers to us. It was this like hyper convoluted process that just sucked a lot of time and resource. It got to the point where some of our contractors that we had helping us work on the project weren't getting paid in time for the work that they did. And one of them in particular was potentially looking at doing taking legal action against us because we weren't paying them for work they did, several months ago. And we had to keep kind of like going back to them saying, sorry, like we really wish we could, but we can't even get paid from the client because of this stupid policy they've set that we only get paid after all the work is done. Now that I look back, I would have shut that down from the beginning and said, we are not going to work with you if you don't pay us anything up front because I'm a small business. I've got an office to pay for. I've got payroll to pay for. I got freelancers who are starting on this work, right? Sometimes people in that government space don't understand what it's like for entrepreneurs on the ground level because they've been in government for a long, long time with nice, safe paychecks, So while it sounds like I'm ranting against the government as a whole, we've worked with other ministries who have been incredible, who literally said, here's the money, we'll pay it all up front or 95% of it up front because we want you to just have everything you need to get the work done. And so now that I've seen both, we've now learned in those very early conversations, be extremely clear with them what your expectations are and sort those all out before you put pen to paper. Yeah, it can shock you later.
Yeah. And you quickly realize that as a business owner, when it starts getting really serious, cash flow is king.
Big time.
Cash flow is so important.
Oh, yeah.
You don't want to be chasing invoices that should have been paid the month before that. And I think the other key thing is contracts are very important. Make sure you understand what you're signing up for.
Yeah, that's right.
And, as education, we're quite clear as well. And some people respect you when you're quite firm or you use the word staunch to be like, we're only going to start delivering if you can pay up 50% and then, whatever the milestones or whatever 50% at the end, however you want. Yeah. Just remember, you can negotiate the contract too.
Yep, that's right.
So just because they hand it over to you from their end and say, here's our agreement, you're allowed to challenge it. You're allowed to suggest changes. Yep. You're allowed to make, before you sign it. Yep. It's a yes or no situation.
Yeah, that's right.
So just keep that in mind as well. And cash flow is so important and having a plan in place around that. Yeah. To look after that. Otherwise, it affects your staff, your brand, and hurts potential future business as well.
Well, then you spend more time putting out fires and not enough time growing the business. And that can kill a business. If you're spending 95% of your time putting fires out, you'll keep telling yourself, oh, it's just for a season. I just got to get it out of the way. But if you don't change the way that you're negotiating, right, you will just perpetuate the fires that need to be put out over and over again. And you can get burned out very easily. In some worst cases, people end up getting so stressed about everything. Maybe invoices aren't getting paid, they can't make payroll, that they then go take mortgage back out on their house to be able to start paying their staff. And all of a sudden they start losing their assets. And now their family's in trouble because of some of these things they should have been more aware of earlier in the piece. So, critical.
Yeah, especially. Yeah. If you need some financial advice, seek out a financial advisor or talk to some accountants. Get some help.
Absolutely.
Right, especially when your business starts to make more and more money.
Yeah.
So, thank you for giving us insights in terms of that. So, let's talk a little bit more about the 3D printing here, if that's okay. Just a few more questions before we wrap things up here in the podcast. Obviously the tech sector is so wide. There's so many different technologies out there, AI and all these cool stuff that's coming out. Why 3D printing specifically? Why is that such a huge emphasis for you guys?
Few things. One, from an economic standpoint, 3D printing can be an extremely effective way to fuel an economy. For one main reason I can give you an example of. If you are, say, a new business, you've got a product that you want to sell, you go to try to do the traditional manufacturing route. Say you go to China, you find a manufacturer, they can do everything to exactly what you want, but then they come back and say, the minimum quantity that we need to make this work for us is like 1,000 units. And you're just a small business that's like, oh man, I only need like 50 units to start with, right? 3D printing can solve that problem. It doesn't mean the business owner has to go learn 3D printing, but as an example, maybe find a rangatahi who's proficient in it, work with them and say, hey, can you produce these products for me from your machines? They can produce exactly what you need in a small, kind of a small form factor. They don't have to have a massive factory full of machines, that are the size of football fields. They can do this with a machine that fits on a desktop. So there's that element. Second is the creativity element. So what I've noticed over time with technology is, take a look at Canva. Canva is a pure example of what happens when you take the power to do graphic design and put it in the hands of anybody who's never done it before, right? And you now see small business owners who've been able to grow their business even further because they have this tool that makes it so much easier for them to do that kind of thing. 3D printing is the same. Yes, there's a bit of a learning curve, but once you get over that learning curve, it unlocks creativity in any industry. We've had youth who are looking to design solutions for major companies who only need a couple of small parts, but they've said to these youth, we are more than happy for you to make those for us. We don't know what the parts look like yet. We can tell you what they need to do. You come up and solve that problem for us. And the youth then has to go through a design process to solve that problem. We've had others who have seen 3D printing as a way to express themselves artistically and make money from that. So it's not just a kind of a little hobby, but it's something that they can actually kind of make a bit of revenue from. For schools, this is probably for me one of the most powerful examples of 3D printing. And I'll give you a very specific example. Part of our training with the educators is not just how to use it in the classroom, but we're also teaching them how to use these machines to print their own resources. So we're hearing about this all over the news right now with the strikes, that there's not enough budget. Right? Schools are always struggling with having plenty of budget to provide better experiences for their kids, better pay for their teachers, and better working conditions for their staff. With 3D printing, they can print specific resources that would save them thousands and thousands of dollars. We're actually building a use case right now with a couple of schools where they've started getting teachers from every department to make a list of the things that they have budget for that they feel are really expensive, and then we're going to see how much would it cost us to make this on a 3D printer. And I'll give you one example. Science department, Aotearoa College, shout out to them. We're doing a full package with them now, doing training and everything. Head of science department came up to us and said, hey, so I'm kind of seeing like what these machines can do. Could we print biological, anatomical models for demonstrations in class from these machines? I said, yeah, easy as. And the cool thing is the files are completely free online. So you don't even have to design the file from the design from scratch. So okay, well, how much would it cost me to print, say, like a human heart model? Just like a static, doesn't move or anything, just a static human heart model. We ran the calculations and it was something like $10. And he goes, okay. Every time I have to buy these, they cost me $200. And that's just one example of many of the types of things schools are spending budgets on that are way overpriced. and yet they can make them on their 3D printers for a fraction of the cost. Another example, sports department at Aotearoa College, this is a small example, needed whistles for a bunch of their coaches. So they literally found a free model online for whistles, printed a whole batch of them on one plate. I think they printed like 40 of them. The cost per whistle to 3D print was 8 cents a whistle. And they normally spend $10 on these. Wow. And it printed the full batch in something like 4 hours. So in an afternoon, they just saved themselves like hundreds of dollars from what they would have gone and spent money on, right? And so we've had some schools, some principals who have come to us after realizing this and said, I want 3D printers in every department. I want every department to be printing their own resources. We've had one principal who said, if there was a student who wanted to do this as a business, we would pay the student to do it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's pretty cool when you kind of think of it from that aspect. Yeah. So that's one thing we're really pushing with schools is use the machines for your own benefit as well. Don't just look at this as a classroom thing. Look at this as something that will help you to repurpose budgets so you can afford the more expensive equipment you've been wanting to buy, or repurpose budgets to create better initiatives for the youth, better conditions for them to work in, you know? So, yeah, so that's something that we're kind of working on right now, building a use case around that.
This is amazing. I feel like I need to sit through one of your workshops and get my own 3D printer.
Absolutely.
I did a bachelor's of product design a couple of years ago, and we learned about 3D printing. But back then, it was still very new. But also, when they did get 3D printer, it was massive machines.
Oh, yeah.
And over the years, I've seen it develop, and it's become more, people can buy it for their own home use. And that's what you've done. Yeah. It's more accessible. But, even though it's available, that doesn't mean it's 100% accessible to people. You still need to learn it. There's a mindset thing around it. But what I love about what you shared is that you've helped them integrate this as part of their kaupapa or their operations or their organization. How can it help us as an organization? It's not just a thing that we can learn and do and teach our students, but we can integrate it to help us save money. That's right. That is awesome. Yeah. I feel like you hit a jackpot here.
Yeah, that's right.
This is cool.
That's what I mean about this whole, like, it seems too good to be true. And we hear this at schools all the time until they actually use it. And they're like, I can't believe I just made that. And I can't believe I've just saved me thousands of dollars doing that. My first printer, I made these products. I did these, it was actually just an experiment during lockdown. I did these Bulbasaur Pokemon pot plants because I saw it and I was like, it's a unique thing. Maybe people would like it. I put it up on Marketplace for like $35. The cost to produce them was like $2 something, maybe $3 something. I sold enough of those in 2 weeks to pay off the whole machine. And then everything else that kept coming in after that, I just bought more machines and printed more products and sold more. So right now what we're doing in our business, it's a new arm of the business, kind of two new arms. One is we are producing our own 3D printed products. And we've just started off, just as a bit of a plug-in, we started off with our first product, which are these, I'm actually gutted I didn't have one to bring today. They're called ocarina portal. So they are actual instruments that you can play. And they aren't necessarily taonga portal, like belonging to the traditional family of Māori instruments, but we see them as a gateway. They're really easy to play. And what we've noticed is that kids in particular, when they start using this, they get really interested in learning more about it or, trying other instruments and that kind of thing. So we've just launched that online in partnership with Cornate, and it's going very, very well. We've actually got our machines just operating 24/7 now, just producing enough units for that. And then we're doing commercial 3D print jobs on the side, and we always do those jobs with rangatahi and split those profits evenly with them. So the Mati Hiko Awards, we just did those over the last week. And we had 2 rangatahi work with us on that project. They had never done 3D printing prior to 2.5 months ago. And now they've got their first paid job doing these prestigious awards that have been shown like all over the country now. And for them, when I went back and asked them, like, what's it like for you seeing this? They're like, man, it's almost too good to be true. I can't believe that something I worked on is now like being shown all over the country. So that's kind of part of our new kaupapa is actually taking on commercial 3D printing so we can walk the walk and show schools and kids like we're making money from 3D printing as well,
That is so awesome, Jesse.
Yeah, thank you.
I love that. And obviously you already mentioned it already in terms of your story, your journey. It was just you. You were just trying to try different things, experiment 3D printing, and now it's gone from you to how many people in your team now today?
Yeah, so myself and my co-founder, we have 3 in our core team, and then we've just brought on another 8 new facilitators and a couple of other admin staff. So we're sitting around somewhere between 12 and 15. But the demand is starting to pick up so much that probably in the next year or two, we're going to need to double the size of the team and just have them send them all over the country to do training for us.
Yeah.
Because it's pretty draining having to fly to a new place every 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
Live out of a suitcase for months at a time, you know?
Yeah. I guess as one of my last questions on this podcast, thank you so much. Tell us a little bit about the journey of going from 1 to many, or 2, co-founder to many. What are the 3 key things you think entrepreneurs need to consider when they're scaling? When their team is growing.
Yeah.
What are 3 key things?
So set a cash flow rule is probably the first thing I can recommend. It's always hard to know how much cash flow should I have secured before I can hire. It's always hard to know, and every industry is different. For us, we worked with our accountant and took a look at our previous financial years and kind of figured out that if we can afford enough for 6 to 12 months worth of cash flow for our current team, then we are ready to hire 1 or 2 or 3 people, depending on how much they're going to cost us to hire as well. And I'm not saying that's a golden rule for every company, but this idea of think about it in cash flow terms. For us, we know that if we had 6 to 12 months worth of cash flow with our current team, that's plenty of runtime for us to generate more revenue to keep the cash flow up. If we only had a couple months worth of cash flow, I mean, maybe, but it's a bit risky. If you've only got a couple months left and then you're like, oh, we're going to hire 3 new people. So I would say look at your cash flow. Second is consider different ways of bringing people into the team. So right now, our freelancers, for example, they're not full-time. They will probably eventually become full-time, but we've got them in more as a freelance kind of casual basis. And what we've found is that it not only works well for them, but as we get busier, they're more than happy to take on more time, right? So it's kind of a win-win for both of us. We don't have to take the risk of having 8 new full-time salaries on our payroll. We can gradually grow them into that. But it means that who we chose for those roles need to be people who are flexible enough to make that arrangement work. And so many of our facilitators now, they're either not really working or they're kind of doing other freelance jobs every now and again, or they're in a work position where they can take off time whenever they need to come and do mahi with us. So yeah, just think carefully about that. So then you're not putting them out when you're like, oh, we don't have enough work to pay you for a full salary, but we might pay you once every couple of months when we have the need for it. And then they've got a family they've got to provide for. Doesn't quite work, eh? Last thing I would say is before you even think about hiring, if you're in a position as a founder now, you haven't made your first proper hire yet, ask yourself, do I know how the finances work in my company? If you don't have good financial systems, and you're just like blindly grabbing money from different accounts and shoving them in other accounts to pay for things, and you're constantly having to move your money around, you don't have systems good enough to be able to hire people yet. You will put yourself in risk. So meet with a financial advisor, meet with your accountant. If your accountant's not really helping you with that kind of stuff, get a new accountant. Because we've had useless accountants who really did the bare minimum for us. And the new accountant we have now is the man. Like first meeting we had with him, he saved us like 15 grand with the advice that he gave us. So get the right people on your side and get the right advice from the right people.
I love it.
Yeah.
And 2 more questions.
Cool.
Final advice. Any advice? If there's one big advice that you could share with entrepreneurs or business owners out there, what would it be?
I would say, this whole principle of work on your business, not in your business. I think I may have got that right. It's this whole idea of like, try not to get too brought down with all the mundane stuff, the day-to-day stuff, but keep that bird's eye perspective. For me, when I get too busy and burned out, as I mentioned before, I'll take a break from my company for a day or 2. But when I come back, I don't just get straight back into the emails and the invoicing and I will spend a bit of time thinking from a bird's eye perspective, and I will really ask myself, where are we at right now? And based on our ambitions and our goals, what is the next viable step we need to take to make that happen? I've found that doing that allows me to put everything into perspective. Yes, I still have 20 emails I've got to respond to. I'll get to those. but they are not as important as figuring out the next step for our company. Especially if you're the CEO, man, like your team is looking for you to make those calls.
Yeah.
If you don't like delegating, my next tip is get comfortable with delegating. As I mentioned, I'm quite a staunch person, and I used to be real stubborn about that. Like, no, I can take it on. It's not that I didn't trust my teammates. It was like, I want my teammates freed up to do their jobs really well. But there are times where I got so busy, it wasn't viable for me to do everything I thought I could do. And so I actually just started delegating. And even though I was a little like, I've got to delegate, I should be doing this myself. As soon as I knew that was off my chest, it was almost like, not a sense of relief, like, now I don't have to do that. It's, now I have more capacity to think about these other things that are really, really important, that nobody else in the company can really take responsibility for. So delegate.
I love that. Delegating the right things to the right people at the right time, especially if you want to scale, you've got to learn to delegate.
Have to,
You can't be doing everything as CEO. And I love what you mentioned there in terms of the checkpoints, the bird's eye view. It's important to like reflect before you just get sucked into the doing. Where are we as a business? Are we on the right track? Are we achieving what we're supposed to? Etc. You know? Right. So I love that. Thank you so much for blessing us with your time, brother. Honestly, you've dropped a lot of good values and insights and gems here. I've learned so much just spending time with you. We're better for it, for your time. Love the work that you're doing. Love the impact that you're making, especially for our rangatahi. Keep up the awesome work, and wish you all the best and success for you and your team.
Thank you.
If people want to get involved or get in touch with you in regards to what you do with Vaka, how can they do that?
Yep. Best thing to do is go to our website, www.vaka.co.nz, and reach out to us, especially if you're a funding organisation that loves this kind of mahi. We always have a need for funding. But even if you're a school keen for this kind of stuff, get in touch with us as well. We'll see what we can do.
I love it. There you go. CEO of Vaka, Jesse Armstrong. Thank you so much for your time, brother. Appreciate it.
Thank you.